Hey everyone, and welcome back to Fine Print. Today's episode is episode 3 of the AP World History Review. Today, we're going to be focusing on Unit 5, Revolutions. So without further ado, let's get started. When talking about revolutions in the world, it is important to note the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was when people began looking to humans rather than a deity to solve their problems and rationalize. Being born with a blank slate and experiences and environmental shaping of who you become were very important factors of the Enlightenment beliefs. Some key philosophers were as follows. Thomas Hobbes argued that humans were naturally evil and needed governments to provide order and stability. He wrote the Social Contract, which said that people could give up some rights to live under a centralized government. John Locke, perhaps the most notable figure of the Enlightenment, argued that people have certain unalienable rights, right to life, liberty, and property, all granted by God. Next, Baron de Montesquieu wrote about the separation of powers, checks and balances, and the prevention of one branch from overpowering the other. Jean Voltaire advocated for freedom of religion, speech, and separation of the church and the state. Jean-Jacques Rousseau emphasized the importance of the common good. Adam Smith created capitalism and the concepts of free market. And lastly, Thomas Paine advocated for U.S. freedom from Britain and wrote the pamphlet Common Sense. As Enlightenment ideas circulated throughout the world, there were some key Enlightenment reforms and movements that took place. Enslaved people, women, and serfs demanded equal treatment and basic rights. Slaves began to fight against their owners for freedom and challenged the institution of slavery. Serfs sought to assert their own autonomy, and serfdom ended by 1750. When it comes to some notable women in the women's suffrage movement, Elizabeth Cady Stanton stands out. She applied the concepts of natural rights in the women's suffrage movement and rewrote a part of the Declaration of Independence to include women. Furthermore, the Seneca Falls Convention was the first women's rights convention that marked the beginning of the women's suffrage movement in America. Some important Enlightenment isms to know were as follows. Socialism stated that workers should own the means of production. Classic liberalism reflected Enlightenment ideas and pushed back traditional ways of society, thus the name liberalism. Classic conservatism sought a natural social order and believed in monarchies and nobility. Nationalism was intense loyalty towards one's country. Utopian socialism demanded shared ownership and equal rights. And lastly, Zionism was the desire for the Jewish homeland in the Middle East. Moving on to the actual part of Unit 5, Nationalism and Revolutions. I'm going to list some key revolutions here, and there are some that importantly stand out. The American, the French, and the Haitian revolutions. Firstly, the American Revolution started after about the 7 Years' War. As Britain had increased debts, King George began to tax American colonies, which led to resentment amongst the colonies. The Declaration of Independence was created and was inspired by the Enlightenment and contained a list of grievances against the British monarchy. Along with French assistance and George Washington, the US established a constitutional government. When it comes to the New Zealand Wars, Maori tribes, or the native New Zealand tribes, rebelled against Great Britain, who were exploiting resources in New Zealand. However, the stronger British forces eventually overpowered the Maori tribes and established British rule in New Zealand. When it comes to the French Revolution, there were many key events that shaped it. Firstly, debt from the 7 Years' War led France to call the Estates General, and it was formed of 3 estates: the clergy, the nobility, and majority commoners, where each state had one representative, which made it unfair to the commoners, since the commoners made up 97% of the Estates General. This led to the creation of the Tennis Court Oath, and was when the Third Estate ceded from the Estates General under Maximilien Robespierre. They stormed the Bastille and undermined monarchical power. Next, the Reign of Terror was led by Maximilien Robespierre. He led a campaign that sentenced anyone to death if they were suspected of being anti-revolutionary. There was massive use of the guillotine. There was banned Christian practices such as the 7-day calendar and Christian holidays. Napoleon Bonaparte was a French dictator that overthrew the Directory to put order into society and formed very important Napoleonic codes that brought much needed stability to France. Next, the Haitian Revolution took place in the Americas. A very key person was Toussaint Louverture. He led the Maroon communities against the French authorities in Haiti, and leaders redistributed land to free slaves. When it comes to the Creole revolutions, Spain favored peninsulares, who were whites born in Spain, over Creoles, who were whites born in the Americas. Creoles ultimately desired more economic freedom and led to the eventual rise of Simón Bolívar. He was a Creole elite who led the Creoles to an independence movement, wrote the Jamaica Letter, and many Creoles soon settled many new constitutional governments. Puerto Rico and Cuba soon gained independence from Spain. However, the United States soon started to exert its influence on them. When it comes to Italian unification, Count de Cavour started the process of unifying Italy into one nation. He practiced realpolitik, or stressed practical political approaches. They forced Austria to allow Italian unification and was assisted by Giuseppe Garibaldi. When it comes to German unification, Otto von Bismarck stands out. He unified Germany under nationalism and led many military campaigns to slowly gain land for the German nation. When speaking of revolutions, many people don't consider the Industrial Revolution to correlate with the other revolutions. However, the Industrial Revolution was a very key factor of development into further stages of world history. Some causes of the Industrial Revolution were as follows. It primarily took place in Britain and soon spread to the USA, Germany, and France. The invention of coal, steam power, and the steam engine increased production and decreased the cost of goods. The power loom and the cotton gin led to the growth of the textile industries. Some factors of industrialization were the British proximity to waterways, geographic distribution of resources like coal and steam power, urbanization, legal protection of private property, improved agriculture, access to foreign resources, and most notably, capitalism. In the Industrial Revolution, the factory system was a very key part of its success. Before the Industrial Revolution, people grew their own food, but the factory system changed human society and structure. The factory system brought labor production in a single location, increasing urbanization. The production of goods became more organized and led to the growth of cities and the rise of a new middle class. As mentioned, industrialization soon spread beyond Great Britain. In the United States, immigration increased, which ultimately increased employment rates. The US became a growing industrial power because it provided cheap labor sources and had abundant waterways in the Northeast. In Russia, the Trans-Siberian railroads promoted industrial growth. However, Russian industrialization wasn't propelled by private enterprise. The emergence of communism led to rapid state-led industrialization. When it comes to Japan, they industrialized for more of defensive purposes to protect their own traditions. They modernized their economy and increased wealth and power. With a highly educated population, the country quickly adapted to new technologies. As the Industrial Revolution began to grow, the production rates increased disproportionately. Europe and the US took control of the larger share of global manufacturing due to their steam-powered technology. The lack of steam power and new technology led to the decline of the Middle Eastern and Asian industrialization processes. Europe, Russia, Japan, and the United States outproduced non-industrialized areas and provides context to fueling tensions in the world wars. When it comes to new technologies in the industrial age, there were many new technologies and new revolutions that spurred during this time period. Firstly, the steam engine increased transportation through the steam-powered engine. Energy production increased as steam engines generated electricity. They allowed for the extraction of coal and other minerals, and powered plows and agricultural equipment. The internal combustion engine increased transportation costs, built new structures, had efficient production, and was used for power production, militaries, and increased efficiency. Soon, the Second Industrial Revolution followed. Firstly, manufacturing and steel. Assembly line techniques increased efficiency and productivity. The Bessemer process increased the efficiency of steel production, which led to the construction of stronger buildings, bridges, and ships. Energy production. Railroads and steamships improved access to interior lands, and energy from fossil fuels, along with the railroad and the steamship, made exploration much more efficient and easier. Lastly, transportation and communication. Concrete and steel production improved the durability of transportation systems and urban cities. The telegraph improved communication across long distance and increased global interconnectedness. It also increased trade and commerce. Businesses grew as communication increased and allowed deals and negotiations to be made across long distances. When it comes to state-led industrialization, Japan, Russia, and Egypt stand out. Firstly, Japan in the Meiji era practiced isolation and pursued a closed country policy. They restricted foreign trade and valued Japanese traditions. Soon, the United States began to pressure Japan to open to foreign trade, but Japan initially refused. Later, Commodore Matthew Perry arrived to Japan with a fleet of ships and demanded that Japan sign a treaty accepting foreign trade. With the threat, Japan agreed to modernize their country. This led to the formation of the Meiji Restoration, which was a period of political and social reform that led to Japan's modernization. The shogunate and daimyo were abolished and the emperor was given central power. Japan also established a constitutional monarchy. They introduced many Western technologies, ended feudalism, centralized their government, adopted equality before the law, reorganized their military, expanded education, built infrastructure, and the government subsidized industries. Many samurai that initially held a high status found themselves struggling to adapt to Meiji society, and many resisted change. When it comes to Russian industrialization, they shifted from an agrarian economy to an industrialized economy. Tsar Alexander II began a series of economic and political reforms. He abolished serfdom and invested in infrastructure, which improved transportation and communication. He also established state-owned factories. He encouraged foreign investment and helped grow the cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg. However, this ultimately increased the gap between the rich and the poor. When it comes to Egypt, Muhammad Ali was a very key figure. Under his leadership, Egypt separated from the Ottoman Empire and began industrialization, which focused on increasing raw cotton production, production of weapons and textiles, and infrastructure projects. The economy, however, still declined and was in debt with Britain due to a poor leadership and European exploitation. Lastly, when we talk about economic developments and innovations during these revolutions, new economic philosophies came up. Firstly, mercantilism was when governments controlled trade within borders, imposed tariffs, and employed navigation acts. Laissez-faire capitalism was when Adam Smith believed that the economy would naturally regulate itself if people were allowed to pursue their own self-interest. He believed that government intervention would ultimately lead to inefficiency. The division of labor led to increased productivity and economic growth. Free trade led to a greater economic prosperity and allowed for more specialization. Some innovations in business were as followed. Firstly, joint stock banks allowed for more significant amounts of capital, and in the insurance industry allowed countries to fund risky voyages. Transnational businesses drove economic growth and expansion, increased employment, and impacted international trade and transportation. Stock markets allowed many individuals to buy and sell stocks or shares and put them into risky ventures. Some effects on the mass culture of the Industrial Revolution was firstly wealthier populations. People now had leisure time because they earned enough not to work all day and began spending on not just needs but also wants. Consumerism sustained the industry's growth. A negative effect, however, was the widening gap between social classes. Few industrialists held wealth and power. However, the majority working class that lived in poor conditions with low wages led to the rise of labor unions and social movements. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to keep following Fine Print, as tomorrow we're going to be covering Unit 6 of AP World History. Until then, keep following Fine Print for new episodes.